everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's live stream conversation about the latest findings out of the Harvard Harris poll, or Harvard CAPS poll, I should say, with Mark Penn. Mark, thank you so much for joining us in the conversation. Let's start with a 30,000-foot view. What was, I guess we can start with the mood of the country, the change of the country. I think right now as we're speaking, it's Friday, Trump is inaugurated on Monday. So how is the country feeling?
Well, the country hasn't fundamentally changed its feeling, although I think the Republicans are picking up some steam. I mean, the interesting thing about the general mood of the country is about the same. Almost two-thirds think things are going in the wrong direction. But miraculously, a whole bunch of Democrats that thought things were doing well have kind of switched over to the other side. And a bunch of Republicans who thought things were going in the wrong direction have switched over. But you don't see yet a fundamental change in the mood of the country. I think that they're waiting to see what President Trump does and what impact it has on their daily lives. Surprisingly, I think inflation still dominates the mood. Voters are upset about the prices that they pay. And even if inflation has come down, I think the fact they go in and things are 20 or 30% more than they were, and wages have not kept up with that, has really frustrated the American public and continues to do so.
You mentioned the Republican and Democratic bases. How are independents feeling right now?
Independents, I think, are taking a wait and see. You see they didn't really change whether or not they didn't suddenly miraculously wake up and say the economy's better. I think they stayed exactly on a kind of an even keel. They were very much, I think, divided through the election. But the mood of the country towards Trump is that they're waiting to see, him take office, and I think they're giving him the benefit of the doubt.
Right. In terms of Biden's approval rating, earlier this week, he gave his farewell address. I think this poll showed him with a 39% approval rating, very much on track with other polls we've seen. We're coming off a few weeks ago, the country celebrated the life of former President Jimmy Carter. Like Biden, a one-term Democratic president, like Biden, a president who dealt with a hostage crisis and inflation. But we saw Jimmy Carter, it's almost like his standing with the American people improved over a number of decades, and his legacy seems to be remembered. He's remembered quite positively. Is it too early to judge how Biden will be remembered?
Well, I don't think any president is really remembered in history the same way they're remembered on the day of they pass away.
Yeah.
I think Americans really at the time moved quite decisively off of Carter. And as in his post presidency, where he did mostly, very significant charitable work and lived a kind of very modest kind of post presidency, wasn't collecting those big fees from Netflix and others. I think people, admired his character, and they always thought he was a person of good character. But Biden really seems to have had a double souring here, both in job approval. I mean, they really think on his foreign policy, it's interesting. One of his worst approval ratings, even as there's this resolution perhaps of Hamas and Gaza. One of his worst ratings is on the Israeli crisis, where they think that they think he should have been tougher. And they think that really the only reason that there's a hostage deal is that Trump was coming in to be the president, and on immigration and inflation. So, Biden never was willing to recognize the fact that people were upset about many of the things he did. And even in his farewell address, he seemed to be 100% tone deaf to the way people were really feeling.
And that's the perfect segue into my next question. I think the poll shows Trump with a 53% approval rating, certainly, matches, as the wait and see approach, but also coming out of the election, he obviously won the popular vote, won the 7 swing states. So that makes sense. But when we look at the hostage crisis, this, hopefully a resolution between Israel and Hamas. I think we saw a very rare moment this week when you saw the transition team, the Trump transition team, and the Biden administration working together, with the, all parties involved in that negotiation. Now, I know that there's been some back and forth as to, who gets credit, but really going forward, Mark, who does get credit for that? Can it be a little bit of both, or is it ultimately going to, fall to one president or the other?
Well, we don't know whether this is something that anybody is going to want to get credit for.
Mm,
We don't know what the state of the hostages is. Look, people thought that Biden was ineffective at getting these hostages back. And in fact, he never really made the position of the administration, you better send these hostages out tomorrow or you're going to have hell to pay. And I think Trump made that. He said that, day one, if you don't get some hostages out. And let's remember what happened with Carter was that the Iranians held the hostages until the day that Reagan took office and
right.
then miraculously let the hostages go. So this is, when they say history repeats itself, now I don't, Hamas here, it doesn't have a government standing in the same way to protect, um, but it is clearly, and the public picked up on it in the poll when we asked the question, who gets the quote credit for this resolution, or it wasn't so much credit that we put, but who do you think is responsible for Hamas, or creating, agreeing to the ceasefire? It really went to Trump and the notion that there is a notion underlying this that if Biden had remained president, this deal would not have happened, and that they knew Trump was coming, so they had to cave at least to some extent. And whether or not this works out or doesn't work out, clearly they know that the Trump administration and all the people he's appointed are four square behind Israel versus Hamas. And Hamas, when I asked the question, are you for Hamas or Israel? It comes out 80-20. It was 79-21. It hasn't changed a point.
Mm,
I think there's more sympathy I see in some of the polls for Palestinians, but that shouldn't be confused with sympathy for Hamas, right, or
yeah.
Hezbollah, or Iran, for that matter. There's always sympathy for people caught in the middle of a crossfire, and we saw in the poll less interest in going forward with the defense of the Ukraine. So there are some big potential changes and shifts here, but Trump is kind of has an opening job approval, or before his inaugural speech of 53, maybe he can raise it. When I won in 96 with Clinton, at that time things soared, to
Mm.
60. So I won't say that all the doubters have come over. I will say that he's in a good position. He's broken past 50. The Republicans are also in a pretty good position. They've broken past 50. They're not in the high 50s, but they've got opportunity here to win people over.
I want to turn to the California wildfires because you pulled some data on voters' attitudes towards the handling of the wildfires and the response. Obviously, state and local officials in California and Los Angeles are under quite a bit of quite a bit of pressure and scrutiny right now. I think the poll found Newsom guilty of mismanaging resources, or voters said that 57%, 60% said the same thing about Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. Is it surprising that, I mean, I guess I'm surprised that maybe Newsom has a 50, that 3 point difference between the two of them. I guess it's not that big of a difference, but do those, what can we glean from that?
Well, the closer you are to the fires, the more responsibility they apportion to you. Being I think the mayor who isn't that well known, had negative personal ratings, but you really saw a plummeting in Newsom's national ratings. Although most Democrats, 65% said, "Oh, he did everything that he could." So maybe he still has a life in the Democratic primary, though I would kind of see this as pretty as about as close to a game ender and as you get in politics. They're obviously able to point to lots of people who said that government should have made better preparations here, that this was foreseeable in many respects. So, I think this is a huge setback for Newsom's presidential aspirations here, and I think you're beginning to see that reflected in the poll.
Right, right. Want to move to some, I guess, news of the day topics. Or just hours ago, the Supreme Court upheld the future ban on TikTok set to go into effect on Sunday. We are hearing that there could be some last ditch efforts by the government to maybe extend the period before the ban. And Donald Trump, the president elect, saying that he might intervene. 55% called it a national security threat, which, I understand, but it's interesting to listen to the media narrative of this week. I mean, TikTok has been, sort of described as this immensely popular social media platform. We're already hearing in the narrative that, it's better than, let's say, there's another Chinese video app that's kind of coming up on the horizon, Redbook or Rednote, sort of comparing the two. But it seems like TikTok itself as a company has gotten sort of favorable coverage, I would say, ahead of this, supposed ban. For I guess, are you do these numbers kind of line up with what you've been seeing when it comes to TikTok? And is there an age disparity here between younger voters and older voters?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that TikTok is getting more sympathy the closer you get to an actual possible extinction of the app. Not as much because I think that the app is popular, but because there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans that make their living by being a TikTok creator. And I think when this whole TikTok thing, came on, the national security threat is what people see. They do want resolution of this, that there would be a transfer to American ownership. But on the other hand, they also do not want to put out of work, all of these creators. So that's why I think you see, as we came down to the deadline, I think that both presidents are kind of pushing it off a little bit to see if they can find a solution that deals with the national security problem, but doesn't kind of. I mean, I don't know if you want to have a million angry TikTok creators going after you. That'd be a pretty awesome political force.
Right, right. And I know that the poll also touched on news consumption and social media consumption. I'm curious about attitudes and on in consumption about X, formerly known as Twitter. And I ask about X because we know that Elon Musk, its founder, has just had immense influence with President-elect Trump, and will likely have that influence for the near future. So what did those attitudes look like?
Well, I recently did a half-hour interview with Elon Musk, and so personally, I'm a free speecher in that sense. And look, I think that again, overall popularity of all social media, I think, is in some American crosshairs, but on the other hand, the usage of the platforms, whether you're TikTok or the growing really usage of X, demonstrates that these platforms have enormous constituencies. Elon Musk's favorable in the poll was positive by a couple of points. I think that he's consistently been that. I was rather surprised by the very positive ratings of RFK Jr. Uh, in the poll. And I think people, if I go through the objectives of the administration, they want to see inflation curbed, they want to see immigration curbed, and they want to see, $1 to $2 trillion of government spending, reduced. So I think that there's a huge mission here, and whether how Musk carries out that mission and what it results in will be quite powerful.
Absolutely. Mark, we only have a few minutes left, but I guess the next time you guys are out in the field, we're going to be in this new administration. What are you most interested in asking voters out in the field in the midst of the first weeks of the Trump administration?
Well, I think the one significant finding we didn't touch on
Yeah.
is the extent to which the Democratic Party has nosedived.
Mm,
I mean, the Democratic Party typically has, ratings that um, are close to 50, generally better than the Republicans. The Republicans now have significantly better ratings. The Republicans are better, and the Democrats are in the low 40s. I think like 41%, more or less the lowest I have seen in favorability. So when people look here, the Republican Party is increasingly getting its act together. They're looking better than expected at some of these hearings, for example. I think you'd agree. But the Democratic Party looks to be flailing, which is also not a surprise in the sense that they wouldn't have a leader now. But with a president going out at 39% approval, with disapproval of the way the administration has handled most of the top issues, and with leaders kind of carping old talking points from January 6th and so forth, Democrats out there are looking rather weak right now, and I think one of the biggest shifts in the poll is the I think what I would see as an almost chaotic situation with the Democratic Party right now, and so that's going to play itself out. I think in terms of seeing here. Look, they're looking to see how is this administration going to come out? How are these policies going to affect the border? The number one thing that they want to see is that they believe that criminals criminals who are undocumented in here should be deported. And that was overwhelmingly the number one priority that they expect out of this administration. And it will be up to Trump, too, to see, in his inaugural, not to do something that really divides it, but maybe something that gets his 53 up to 55 or 56. And it's very important. I've managed a second term with President Clinton, and you want to get as much of a reservoir of goodwill as you can so that you
Yeah.
can get your policies passed, and for those in Congress to realize that you really do have the not just the partisan political power, but national political power that comes from the real approval of public opinion.
There's a lot to look out for in the next few weeks and going forward in the second Trump administration. So I'm sure we will be talking more. Mark Penn, thanks so much.
Thank you, Judy.